There is no intro because these films broke me. Hello, everybody. Welcome to
Really?
First Dates
That's
with
the
Moire.
best intro I've seen.
Yeah, that is, just eerie silence for the first 10 seconds. And that perfectly sums up the tone of the first two movies we're talking about tonight. Because tonight is the Easter special over on First Days with Maury. Saturdays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, who cares? It's Maury time, baby. I'm your host, Ian Taylor. Join me tonight is my wonderful co-host, musician, artist, and filmmaker, Devin King, and
Woo!
returning guest and animator and recovering booster addict, Drew Adams. How you guys doing tonight?
Thank you guys so much for having me back on the podcast. It's always a pleasure to join you guys.
Well,
Yeah,
we are
man, it's a,
happy to have
it's
you.
a pleasure to have you as always.
So,
And
yeah, go on.
I couldn't think of well, I do want a quick shout out to Sierra, yeah, she's the one that came up with covering the second film we're doing tonight, and I'm like, and the second she thought Easter for this, I'm like, damn, we got to make this happen. So unfortunately, she couldn't make it on the podcast tonight. Just a bunch of things going on, but I'm excited to get into these, and they all happen to be animated films, centering around Easter, um, somewhat superficially, and all made for kids. But you probably wouldn't want to show them to your kids. That's the theme. That's why it's not for kids.
Or maybe you should show them to your kids, depending on how
Maybe.
you view the world. Because the first movie we're talking about tonight, the creator of this story, made these stories up as a way to tell these stories to his own children. Not only as
Oh, they were.
bedtime stories, but while they're just driving about, he made up these stories to tell his kids at night, and he thought, yeah, this is a good idea. Gotta give him some good old nightmare fuel with Watership down. I guess I'll introduce this one.
I mean, what else are you gonna tell your kids when they're misbehaving in the car?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, alright, if you don't behave, a seagull's gonna come up to you and say, no bitches. That doesn't happen in the movie, but we'll get into it in a little bit. That sums up the first act of the film. Alright, so, Watership Down is a British, I believe, British movie from 1978 based on a story created by Richard Adams that he told his children while they were out driving or while they were at home, as I mentioned earlier. It's about a group of rabbits, friendly, fuzzy rabbits that have nothing bad to them happen to them for the entire movie, and they're fine, and everything's fine. Don't worry about it, okay? But what it's really about is a group of rabbits hoping to escape destruction by human developers and uh, that are trying to save their community. So these colony of rabbits are essentially all that's left, led by two rabbits named Hazel and Fiver. I believe it's Fiver. I swear they pronounce it two different ways in the movie, but they're trying to seek out a safe place to set up a new warren. But along the way, there are many losses, many other rabbits that start to fight each other and grow insane, and
Lots of casualties.
lots and lots of casualties, especially in the third act. This story is. It kind of reminds me of a darker Lord of the Rings in a way.
Hmm.
Just a set,
Interesting.
it's all these creatures going on this epic journey, and they're dealing with all of these horrible creatures and this like all of this aftermath. It's a much darker version of that tale, but to me it does kind of scratch that itch a little bit. Even some of the evil rabbits, in a way, kind of remind me of the orcs. Like they come from underground, they're just mindless and feral. And but obviously this is much darker, much more brutal, much more violent, and it is. I've been hearing about it for quite some time. People kind of joke about like how like edgy it is and how violent it is, and just the whole meme of, oh, you don't want to show this to your children. Oh, it's for kids. But I actually didn't think it was as bad as I was led to believe, and I think a big reason for that is it's not pointlessly edgy or excessive, and there is very much like a message the film's trying to say. And there's a maturity to all of the violence and all of the deaths in the film. It isn't just edgy and violent for the sake of being edgy and violent. Like there is a real tastefulness to the story that I don't know, just made it seem like the hype surrounding it was just a bit much. It just feels like a very mature story that happens to be somewhat aimed at children, however you want to interpret it. But honestly, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. But I'm curious to see
Yeah.
what you guys think. And I mean as bad as in terms of the subject matter, not for the quality of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just because it is directed at kids and it is as violent as it is, that hype maybe is a bit accentuated. But, if you're watching it as an adult, you're maybe more desensitized, or it's not as gory as a lot of other things that you expect. But I do admire the sense of realism, I guess, for
Mhm.
better or for worse. Like, this shows what a real kind of squabble between rabbits would probably look like. It's just animalistic. Um, and but there is some kind of sophistication to it, I suppose. And I do find it interesting that it was written based off of stories that this person would tell his own kids. Um, and you can compare and contrast what you think of that if you have kids, if this is the kind of stories you would tell them. But the first thing that I noticed, and this is admittedly a very pedantic technical thing, is the smear marks on the planes of glass that they animated with. I don't know if you
Mhm.
noticed that, Drew, in your copy of the film, but I can tell that this was probably done with a lower budget.
So this movie, I think, it properly impressed me. I never actually saw Watership Down as a kid, and I'm actually probably quite grateful for that because as an adult, I felt like I could much more appreciate the story it was trying to tell without being totally traumatized by the proper amount of intensity that this story actually carries. This isn't a sugary Disney movie, and from some anecdotes that some of my personal friends have told me who ended up watching this show as children, I don't think I know anybody who watched this as a kid who actually liked it. And I think I can empathize with why.
Well, that's interesting to me because that's kind of what the whole hype surrounding the film is to me. But watching
Mm-hmm.
it, like, there is a lot to genuinely appreciate about it. Like, yeah, the animation's rough around the edges, but it's very charming. Like, it's very, you can at least tell like the animators like worked hard on it. I think the rabbits designs in particular are like exceptional. Like, they're
I
just
strongly
so
agree.
expressive. They're so they all look different, despite the fact that they're like they don't have any unique features, or like none of them have any hair. Well, I think a few of them have hair, but none of them have like any exaggerated features. You know how an animated movie would typically separate characters. They're all kind of a similar species, just with different tones of like skin color, but just from the way they
Or
move and the way their skin changes just enough, like if they feel like different characters. And I
I
really
strongly
appreciate the
agree.
attention to detail in that regard. There is,
Yeah,
like I
there's
said,
very
it's yeah,
good,
gone.
like, subtle kind of differences in character design, different fur colors and whatnot. And there are these rabbits that are in this warren. But what really like intrigues me, and I didn't know what to make of it when I saw it. I'm still processing it, but it's kind of unnerving but fascinating at the same time, is how this one bunny gets tipped off that they should probably leave. He just has this like prescient vision of the field being filled with blood, and these very nightmarish like visions that he's having. Like, he's clearly not okay.
So
No,
perhaps we should
But
begin at the beginning then, because this movie is the one that I have more notes for than any other film on tonight's list.
I can
you
see that.
tell.
Watership Down, this movie made me feel so many different emotions and so many conflicting feelings because I strongly agree with you, Ian. I think that the actual animation art, the capital A art that went into this movie, really does shine through. The characters' movements are almost unsettlingly realistic at times. The way that the rabbits hop and move, they're always a little bit on edge or unsettled. Clearly, the artist paid an enormous amount of attention to actually portraying the realism of these creatures.
Yeah, they've
I
definitely been
kept thinking about.
around a lot of rabbits.
Mhm. I kept coming back in my mind to the other British animated story about animals that I really liked. Well, it's a British story anyway. Is Brian Jake's Redwall, and how very different this story of rabbits is versus the sometimes, especially the animated version, much more light-hearted, medieval animals who live in a nice cozy castle. Watership Down has, pardon the pun, some real bite to it. Uh, this is a story with mortality and reality, and I was first of all properly struck by the mythological superstructure of this
Yeah.
story. I think all of these stories have really good either surrealist or mythological superstructures that help conduct their story.
Yeah, and the way
Mhm.
it's animated too is very like strange and eerie. It's almost like you're watching like an ancient painting brought to life. Like it's very hard to explain, and I'm wondering if maybe there were budget limitations with that opening in particular. But I think in that case, like the abstract look of it really does like help sell, like invest you in the opening of the story, and kind of help sell that this is like an exaggerated interpretation of somebody else's story, and it kind of almost feels like a
Mhm.
children's drawing too. It's very very
Hmm.
interestingly animated, that opening in
I
particular,
was
Yeah, it's
and it
got
took
this
me off guard. It's like,
it's
wait,
got that
there's
like
yeah,
children's it's got that like children's storybook kind of painterly quality to it, but
hmm
then it has this, violence kind of on the forefront. And I mean, I was watching this in HD, and there's a lot of like texture from like the film grain, and you can see like the quality version I have. I could see like the white marks on the planes of glass that they used to. I think they had like a multi-plane camera probably to film the layers of backgrounds and cells. Drew probably knows a little more about that process than I do, but it was just really fascinating to really see all the textures of everything happening, and even the blemishes and things they didn't intend to leave there. But yeah, it kind of just all adds to it. There's this kind of texture that brings it all together and adds this realism to it.
hmm
There is. I absolutely noticed the tactile sense of these watercolor and I believe sometimes pastel drawn backgrounds.
yeah,
For our casual audience who might not have seen this movie because they might have lumped this in with a handful of other disturbing movies for kids like Secret of Nim or Plague Dogs,
fuck him.
the movie begins with basically a thesis statement on the I guess you call it the religion these rabbits have, where
Yeah.
in the beginning of creation, all animals are sort of given their unique traits, and the rabbit's trait is to run around real fast. But as we'll find out later on in this movie, some rabbits just can't run fast enough.
No.
Oh boy.
Well, some rabbits just happen to be faster, and it's interesting that the mythology is kind of established by the fact that they live these very miserable, very short lives, and this is just a way, like their own way to cope with what's going on. And I also wanted to mention too, like just like what you mentioned about the paintings, and again, like it's you could tell they had lots of budget limitations, and that like the backgrounds look obviously different than the creatures in the foreground, which obviously is something that got better over time with hand drawn animation. But I, I I think it does work for certain scenes. Like other certain scenes, like I feel like I needed to like be invested in the scenery more. But anytime there's a hallucination, like you talked about with this river of blood, like the strange backgrounds just added to that quite immensely. It's very interesting that you pointed that out. And I'm a huge fan of watercolor paintings too, so maybe I'm a little bit biased. Sorry, I just want to point that out real quick.
No, that's fine. And I actually think that that was a point I was going to bring up later is that this movie it has a tangible texture to it that I think really comes to the forefront in the various hallucination scenes that semi-protagonist Fiverr actually goes through on multiple occasions. This movie has I think some truly properly effective, horrific surrealist imagery in it.
Yeah.
The vision that Fiverr gets of the hill that they live in being covered in blood. Later on, they're told the horrendous story of the land development of the Rabbit Warren, and you get this genuinely unsettling series of images of the rabbits all being either crushed down or gassed out of their warrens. And what the hell was up with that one musical number like in the middle of this
Oh
movie?
wow, I was gonna mention that.
Go ahead then, because that to me was some of the most effective and unsettling musical theater I've seen in quite a while.
I I actually thought like that was the one scene that was just stood out a little too much. Like, yeah, the hallucinatory sequences were strange and horrifying, but it never felt like they went too far. It never felt like they went to the goofy side, but I feel like when the musical number came in, it's like, all right, like this is just a little too much. This is starting to pull me off the experience a little bit. But I don't know. I'm curious to
Yeah.
see what you guys think of the musical sequence, because that point is like, I don't know if the film really earned that musical sequence, because I kind of like the dream sequences were disturbing, but it was a mix of more grounded elements of the story. Like as characters are kind of moving about in their environment, suddenly something psychedelic kicks in, and that's more effective than just delving into a musical number. It's like, all right, we gotta try like up the ante a little bit, but I feel like they went a little too far with that.
I mean, maybe they were just trying to go for some levity in the midst of everything. I'm not sure exactly what the motivation behind it is. Normally, if there are musical numbers, there's more than one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it did stand out quite a bit. But I still think it worked for the most part. Um,
But
I mean, the whole
was
the,
that
the whole
charm?
film was just kind of a bizarre experience from the get-go. So
Oh, absolutely. And this was made in the 70s, so who knows what kind of drugs the creators were on while making it. But I want some. What's next on your
mhm.
notes, Drew?
Well, for me, I think there is a lot of heavy reoccurring symbolism in this movie, especially the
Mm,
character of the Black Rabbit, which is on one hand a genuinely disturbing vision of death that the rabbits continually see, which is their sort of
Yeah.
version of the Grim Reaper. But then, of course, warning audience, we're going to start getting into spoilers later on. That the Black Rabbit makes multiple appearances throughout this movie, and I thought that was a particularly interesting supernatural character.
mm-hmm, for sure. And it
Yeah, and
was,
it makes you wonder if like rabbits do really have these kind of I don't know I don't know if their brains are complex enough to conceive of these kind of things, but it makes I don't know, it makes you wonder what they believe or how they kind of perceive the world because
yeah,
you never yeah, it's just interesting to kind of see that and have these symbols of yeah, the Black Rabbit and how that relates to like the Grim Reaper or whatever other parallel symbols you can equate that to. But yeah, it was just really fascinating. I don't know if this is what's the name of the phenomenon where we kind of anthropomorphize, sort of project our human experiences and thoughts onto animals. I
very
mean, and
Yeah.
much.
that's what these films are essentially at their base, or at least yeah, this one. But no, it is fascinating though.
Oh, sorry. Freaked me out there.
Um, the one thing I want to ask you guys though is that oh darn it, I had a quick question. Well, it'll come back to me.
No worries.
Oh yeah, do you guys think that is this something that you would actually let a child watch? Because I don't. I think that this movie has too much tooth to it for me. I don't think I'd let a younger, maybe a teen audience, but I don't think I'd let a young audience watch this.
That's a good
Well,
question. Yeah.
aside from like the obvious gore aspects up front and the shock value, I'm wondering what the ultimate moral message of this is. Like, what is it trying to
I think the
actually
film
say to
is trying to
kids?
say that, like, death is inevitable, but that's okay. And what we shouldn't try to spend the rest of our lives trying to avoid it. We should try to embrace it and try to make the most of what we have. Is like clearly the message it's going for. Like
Mm.
the symbolism of the cycle of life, the symbolism of the black rabbit, and even the ending where, yeah, sorry, major spoilers now. Where, was it Fiverr? I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names.
Hazel.
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 Hazel kind of dies out at the
So
end of the
there's the Black
story.
Rabbit that shows up
Yeah, the
again.
black rabbit
Hmm.
shows up. Like I feel like that was, a perfect way to tie the story together, because they at that point they accepted their death. They weren't trying to run away from it, and instead just focus on leaving this legacy behind. And that's inevitably what Watership Down was about to me. And this is going to sound really messed up, but I think you should show this movie to children, because children need to understand that, it's great to give them sheltered lives and let them enjoy things at an early age, but at an early age they also need to understand the world is a cruel place. The world is a cruel, harsh, violent place. And I think if you show films like this at an early age, it may be traumatic at the time, but it'll also help them learn, you know accept what the world has to offer a little bit more as they get older. It'll help
I
them.
think you and Don Bluth would agree.
Yeah, I think me, Don Bluth, Martin Rosen, and who's the director of Animal Farm?
Oh, I
I think
can't
they'd
Oh,
all
remember.
agree.
the writer of Animal Farm was or
George
not
Orwell.
George
Orson Welles.
Orwell.
George Orwell. Why did I
Yeah.
think? But also Hideaki Anno went on record saying, kids should be exposed to misery as soon as possible.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Like, that sounds like a messed up thing to say, but the sooner you embrace the misery, the easier it is to accept as you get older.
And it
Oh
is true
yeah.
that it also provides contrast, right? The
Mhm.
more misery that you know of, the more it can help you appreciate the good days around you.
Exactly. And a
Mhm.
film like this isn't misery for the sake of misery. There is a purpose to it. There is a maturity to it. And there are like happy moments. There are like really funny moments sprinkled throughout the film too. Like there is moments of levity. It's not just depression for the sake of depression. It's just very tactile, very violent, but very thoughtful in the process. And I cannot stress
Mhm.
enough how much I appreciate that after seeing some really awful, edgy adult animation over the years that just are edgy for the sake of being edgy, but there's no point behind it. There's no method to
Yeah,
the
I hear that.
madness.
Yeah. Um, I think that this movie it was something that I'm glad I have now finally seen as an adult. But that is quite a compelling point, actually. I do definitely hear where you're coming from.
Now, we should probably address at this point. We mentioned no bitches earlier. Hey, Drew. Why would the no bitches meme apply wholeheartedly to the third act of Watership Down?
Well, if the first act of Watership Down is just escaping the Warren before a apocalypse vision strikes, and the second third of the movie is going and trying to trek to the land where they'll be safe, the latter third of this movie is actually quite interesting because though they reach their safe paradisal sort of land, they quickly realize they have no bitches. And as a direct result, even though they have a nice place to live, they are literally the last of their warren, and that's not good. Rabbits will do what rabbits do, and they need some companionship.
Yeah.
I love the cross section between film analysis and memetics. This is this is our forte, I
Perfect
think.
combination. We'll get to no bitches later with Alice as well, but
Oh yeah.
that's where the film surprised me the most. Was I thought this movie would be they tried to reach the destination and that's it. Like it would just end at that point. So when it was wrapping that up in the second act of the movie, I was like, wait, how many hour? How much time is left? I thought
Mhm.
you said it was 90 minutes. Oh, we're an hour in. Like, where's the film gonna go from here? But it was such an interesting place to take that and just like really stresses out the characters, really turns them against each other. But again, it's that message of you just when it's your time, it's your time. You just need to embrace the end instead of trying to run away from it. And I feel like that was the perfect cementation of it. It's like, yes, this is the end of the line. There's no going anywhere from here, but that's all right. All you need to do is leave legacy behind, and sometimes you just gotta let things lie.
Yeah.
And I
Mm.
think that was the third act, like perfectly expressed that. Some of the characters clearly couldn't handle it, but the character that thrived the most found a way to, you know, put up with it once and for all, and continue the
Mhm.
cycle of violence in a spitting sun.
Mhm.
Happy, happy, happy! Lots of happy
Indeed.
films tonight.
Uh,
Did you guys have any issues with Watership Down? Mine are very minor, but they did pull me out of the experience. Unfortunate amount, but
Mm.
curious
Well,
to hear what
I'm
you guys
I'm
think.
wondering what accent the bird was imitating, and like what kind of character was he like? Was he making fun of? I don't know if that's like a dated stereotype, but I'm not even sure what he
Devin,
was.
he's obviously British. Come on.
Oh,
You
right.
can't just ask a
Okay.
British person why they're British.
I know.
One
I
of
did. The bird was doing an accent, but I couldn't really place it.
Was that like the actor's actual accent, you think? Because I was thinking that the entire time.
It sounded like a voice he was putting on. Like it sounded like he wasn't speaking English good. The rabbits would like talk to the bird like he's an idiot
Oh, that's
at
probably
times.
why. Like that, he's not quite right in the head, but it did pull me out a little bit. It's like, all right, you're just Like, are you trying to be
Which makes me
funny?
wonder. So, what ethnicity are they making fun of here? I don't know. I can't even place it.
I don't
Well,
think it's
according
ethnicity.
to I'm quite surprised, but not that surprised, that there is, in fact, a fandom wiki for Watership Down, and
Wow.
apparently Kihar the bird sports a, quote, Eastern European accent, and that's all the detail they go into.
Wow, that's not vague.
Hard, yeah. It doesn't really
Yeah.
narrow it down.
No, it
No,
doesn't.
one of my actual notes is just piss off, bird, Watership Down.
Oh fuck, that was the best line in the movie.
Nope.
Where he,
I,
Piss off!
Like, where did that come from? Is that the only curse word in this whole movie?
It's a wholesome story for kids. Rabbits also get violently murdered. You know, we
Piss
can't
off.
swear too much in this. Yeah, piss off.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
if he said get bent, if there's a rabbit that said get bent, this movie would be a 10 out of 10. Just get bent or jog on. If either of those were
Or-
used, would have been perfect.
What if he
No.
said? What if he said get fucked?
It's just a hard
Oh.
F-bomb in the middle of this
Oh.
movie.
Yeah, it's like yeah, at the end of the movie when she's finally accepting her death, she
Yeah.
just says
No,
get fucked.
it reminds me of that TikTok where this guy is like doing a little brief educational piece on Canadian goose and the proper way to deal with one, and he just blows an air horn at it and says get fucked.
Yeah, speaking of the voice acting, I thought there's a lot of talented people involved in this movie, including the great late John Hurt, God rest his soul. I thought a lot of the
Yes.
voice acting was, I don't know if it was the direction or the timing with the animation, but a lot of the voice acting felt kind of stilted and awkward to me. And again, like it's not terrible by any means. It gets the job done, but it's just like a half step off of what it should be. And I'm thinking it's probably just an issue of direction and just inexperience from the animators and the people directing voice actors. But there are a lot of scenes where it's like voice acting is just a little bit off from what it should be. And for such a grounded story dealing with like such heavy subject matter, I kind of expect a little bit better from the voice acting department. But
Well,
that's
there was
probably my
one
biggest
scene
issue.
where like I think it was Bigwig was wanting to talk to their head rabbit to let him know that hey, terrible shit's gonna happen, and the one rabbit kind of just goes into the warden and he just starts muttering, saying, "Oh, have my ears chewed off for this." Like just little ad libs like that I don't know if they were written. They just seemed like little like improvised real ad libs, and I just found those really funny.
Yeah, it kind of takes you
Yeah.
out of the experience a little bit. It's just like, oh, then, yeah, because essentially that's his response to that is like, all right,
Yeah,
that's neat. It's like, no, like you got
it's like
told
my
this horrible
characters.
information. You should be bawling your fucking eyes out.
Well, he was just wanting to speak to their head rabbit. Like he didn't even tell them what the news was exactly. At that point.
But when he did tell him the
I
news,
just
he just I don't know, like the animation of the rabbit was really expressive, but the voice just didn't really match what the character was going through. I don't know, just a half step off. A lot of the voice acting felt that way to me, and because obviously this had budget issues and it's low out of its time, but yeah, some of the animation's pretty janky at times. There's a few frames. There were definitely some skipped frames of animations. There's one where the black rabbit just kind of like floats in the air during one of the
Oh.
chase scenes, and they
There
just
was
break the
one
frame.
there was one scene. I wish I had screen grabbed it, but there was one shot where literally a rabbit disappears for an entire 2 frames.
Yeah.
Just he's just gone. Which
The joys of cell animation.
I know
I
it's
know, it's
charming
like-
for sure. But
you have to I imagine Drew is like you're probably on 1 or 2 different like planes trying to match up all these characters frame by frame, and then I accidentally exposed the last shot and I forgot this one. We can't redo it now. We just got to keep going
yeah,
because you had to re-expose an entire new role to get those done back in the day. This is just so tedious. So
Oh,
Yeah,
completely correct. It's just like the thing that I am so grateful for as an animator in 2022 is, oh my god, we don't have to deal with manually filming our animation.
oh
oh
man.
man, yeah, it does. And that reminds me of the famous render error in Jurassic Park. I don't know if you
Yes.
know about this one, but toward the end when the T-Rex shows up and she bites the little Velociraptor off the ground. That Velociraptor disappears for one frame out of that whole sequence, and you barely notice it. And
I did not notice that.
no, it's one of those things
Right?
that you wouldn't know about until you go frame by frame and you see it. But yeah, that Velociraptor just disappears out of her jaws for one frame, and they just let it run because to re-render that sequence back to the 90s with the CGI they had would have taken months. And it was in a shot that you wouldn't notice, so they just left it in.
Yeah, well, I mean, nobody did notice, so I'll give them credit for that. And obviously, I respect the work that goes into hard, cell animation and shooting on film for said cell animation. It's just, for such a grounded story, it did pull me out of the experience a little bit. Not enough to affect it, but just a little bit. And, there's issues with the sound. Some of the ADR doesn't line up. Characters will be talking, but they don't even frame the characters moving or anything. That's it though, mostly just nitpicks with the technical elements and the voice acting, but the story itself is just such a powerful groundwork that it does make up for those elements, at least for me.
I was just reading through some IMDb stuff, and I remembered the musical number that's in here, and that's sung by Art Garfunkel. And
Yeah.
I thought it was actually quite good. Like his
What?
voice is legendary.
Oh, of
Um,
course.
Paul, was it Paul Simon? No. Yeah, Simon and Garfunkel. Yeah, Paul Simon. It would have been cool to have him in there as well, but I guess they may have split it probably at this point. But yeah, I thought that was a great little piece in there.
Hmm.
Um, and I was just reading through some other stuff. This is still considered the most violent animated PG movie. I don't know if that has been challenged yet by anything else.
Let me
I
see.
imagine it might have.
Most violent animated PG movie. Fantastic Planet. What is
Hmm.
that as violent as Watership Down? I don't know about that. Fist of the
I
North
think it's
Star?
I think it's surrealist.
What?
Like it's which one?
Fist of the North Star, the 1986 anime
It's
film.
not PG rated.
Ah,
That's friggin' I know that you are already dead meme. This is not for kids.
well, hang on. Let me see what IMDb says.
Oh,
It's rated PG.
wow.
What the?
In which country?
America maybe. I don't know. There is
Well,
if
one
there's no.
thing's
I
for
mean, if
sure.
there's no tits in it, it'll probably be rated PG. For the tone.
Well,
Okay.
and honestly though, I do genuinely believe that the rating standards were somewhat stilted back in the. I assume that the British home video rating system, whatever they may have in the UK, I'm willing to bet that they had different standards back in the
Oh
70s.
yeah, it's
Oh,
like
for sure.
rabbits tearing each other asunder. That's totally fine. A pair of tits, get them out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah. No bitches, man. Get them out of here.
No bitches. One of the things that really stuck out to me is that I don't think I actually enjoyed Watership Down very much.
Hmm.
What?
I think it's a genuinely beautiful movie. I really appreciate, like, I know how much work had to go into this thing. I don't believe that the story actively resonated with me. I found myself somewhat regularly legitimately disturbed, and I think that's quite an achievement on behalf of the film. Like they really did an excellent job. There's like, how many frames is it of they're in act 1 where they're traveling away from their warren and they come across a badger in the bushes for like, what, like 2 seconds, and
2 seconds.
you
Yeah.
can just see this thing's eyes and its teeth covered in blood, and I'm like, this movie does everything right in that sense. When it comes to horror or graphic imagery, I genuinely believe that less is more. If you
Hmm.
sprinkle on a little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of graphic content, I think it can be much more effective than just overly saturating your film with nothing but excessive violence and trauma. And I think that's one of the reasons why Watership Down affected me so much. I was very thoroughly impressed with this movie from start to finish. I don't think I enjoyed it though. A brilliant movie, and I can tell why it's got the ratings it does, but I don't think this movie's one for me.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah,
Just a little too
I don't
much.
see myself revisiting this one often, although apparently this has been pretty popular with adults over the years. Like people would go to late night screenings to see this. and not bring their kids with them.
I can imagine that's a
Yeah.
good environment.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
especially if you're into the animation industry at all, or you're just a fan of classic cinema and you're trying to catch up. Like, this is perfect for that kind of audience. It's perfect for like the letterboxed,
Or if you're
community,
just a
or
sick, twisted fuck that likes to see what would normally be a children's animation have blood and gore in it, and people
like
just love
me,
the viscera.
like me,
Yeah,
the one guy who said this
there
movie
are people
wasn't too
that just
bad.
love the spectacle and the viscera. I mean, that was never me. There has to be something more to it than that for it to really resonate, for me to really connect with it. Like, I don't want just like a splatter spectacle. I
Yeah,
want there to be something more to it. And I do think that there's something interesting here, but I don't feel like it quite resonates as deeply as it meant to be, which is what I'm wondering about, like the messaging. Like, obviously, human development is a major concern here, and although there's this kind of religious iconography that you can take or leave, it's interesting to see. But I mean, one of the points that they were saying at the end is about doing what you're told to stay safe, and I don't know, the world's a cruel and violent place, and I don't know. I just don't know if the messaging was 100% there for me. Like, if
hmm.
I needed something more out of it for it to really
Uh,
hit home and connect.
Bruh.
were either of you guys like misled at the beginning about what this movie would turn out to be? Because I sincerely thought this would turn
Yeah.
into like Fern Gully. It's like, oh, here's the dangerous human development bulldozing the land and killing the animals. But then
Yeah,
the
What?
human development of the Warren is just sort of a thing that gets dropped after the end of Act Two.
Well, they're just
yeah,
something in the
it's
foreground.
weird.
But I didn't mind that at all, actually, because, at
Hmm.
that point, the rabbits already reached their destination, but the story moved on. And that's how it surprised me, too. Like, I didn't necessarily expect a Fern Gully. I expected the kind of a war for the Planet of the Apes. Like, they try to get to the location, they reach the destination, but there's some tragic deaths along the way. Something as simple as that. Like, they try to get somewhere dangerous, and they get somewhere dangerous, but a few people don't make it. Like, that's what I was expecting. But the third act definitely took me in for a loop, and it was a pleasant surprise. And I think there is, like, more to the messaging that you guys are giving it credit for, but maybe it's because, I'm just a sick, twisted fuck that has a cynical viewpoint
I
of the
mean,
world.
maybe. I mean, it just didn't connect with me, but I am
Hmm.
willing to look more into it because it is a fascinating kind of anomaly of a film. Just the timing of when this was made. I don't know if this would have been made any other time, although they did try to remake it a couple of years ago, and everyone forgot about it because they just didn't have the same. They didn't really do anything to it other than put it into 3D space and then probably
Yeah.
taper off some of the content. I haven't seen it,
The 3D
but they
animation
turned it.
does not look good
Yeah,
either.
yeah
All the
they
heart is just missing.
they turned it into a little mini series and gave it like very early 2000s style animation.
Yeah,
And this is
it's
in
not great.
2018.
Yeah,
Did you see the preview for that, Drew?
Not only did I not see the preview for it, I only saw like the briefest of it today, and I'm gonna be honest, man. I I had no clue that this existed. I feel like this might have been something some of my art friends would have brought up, and then all of us immediately forgot about it. I feel
yeah.
like
That's what it seems like.
Oh yeah,
it's
yeah.
like when you mention to your friends, hey, remember that time they made a Shark Boy and Lava Girl too? And you're like, oh yeah, that technically exists, huh? Oh well, and then
Anyways,
you immediately forget it again.
you know that Top
Hmm.
Gear meme where the guy is like, "Oh no." Anyways, that's exactly
That's
it. And
exactly it.
oh,
Which,
and it's from the director of 300: Rise of an Empire. Remember that movie?
wow. No,
uh,
I don't.
no.
Exactly.
I do think I was just reading a little bit about Richard Adams. What else did he work on?
Plague Dogs.
Um, oh, Plague Dots. That's another violent looking animated film I haven't seen, but I'm curious
Yeah,
about.
there you go.
Hmm.
Jeez. Anyways, I feel like we're going a bit off topic. Don't
Probably.
have
We're
much
kind
else
of
to add for this one. I'm kind of antsy to talk about Alice, to be honest, but I think
yeah.
Watership Down is still great. Technical elements and the lackluster voice acting kind of gets in the way. As weird as it sounds, I would like to see this story done today. Obviously, not in shitty BBC style animation, but I don't know. Maybe your animation team that you worked with on Final Space could work on, Drew. Like some gorgeous hand drawn animation that also, captures the vibe and atmosphere of the original story with like great voice acting, and something along the lines of Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, where it still captures the original atmosphere of what the original source material was going for, but there's slightly better voice acting, slightly better technical elements, and more of the ambition can be filled out with a bigger budget. I wouldn't mind seeing something for it like this because I think it is a great story with a lot of great animation and powerful themes to it. And I'm giving Watership Down an 8 out of 10. It's not as bad as people made out to be. Stop being whiny babies. That's my review.
Nice. I think I'll give it like a lukewarm 7.
Ooh. What about you, Drew?
Oh, that's interesting. I'm actually going to be quite harsh to this movie. I thought that artistically it was genuinely impressive. I have a lot of empathy and admiration for the scope and scale they tried to get with this movie, the emotion, the character design. I'm I was not particularly captivated by the story, and I think that it was really quite unsettling at times. So it really achieves its goal of like disquieting the audience. I'm going to be kind of cruel, and I'm going to give this a 5.5 out of 10 for me.
Whoo!
Mm.
Wow. Looks like
I
I'm
think
alone
that's
on this one.
fair, and I think you being an animator, you can be a little more critical. You have
Yeah.
a better, more educated, experienced position to be critical of a film like this. And
I'm
I do
glad.
think, yeah, and
Well,
like
I'm. Oh, sorry. Yes.
there is that initial novelty to it, but does it really carry through and tell a decent story? Um, with that, that's really I think the question of what of if it's good or not.
Mm. I was going to say yes. I agree. I think that this movie, I did enjoy watching it through like the first time. I don't think I'll be going back to this one. It didn't properly capture my heart in terms of its story, but I'm very glad that a movie like this does exist. I like seeing experimental stuff, and I really enjoy. I can tell how much effort went into this movie, so it definitely gets like more than a 5 out of 10 for me, but I don't think I can personally give it much higher.
Fair
Fair
enough.
enough. And actually, you know what? I think I'm gonna be a little more honest. I'll probably give it like a 6.6, which
Not
I'll bump
even
up
a
to
nice.
no, which I'll bump up to a 6.9, just because that line that
Hey.
of piss off, which there's been a lot of debate about because it's
Piss
not
off.
in the book or the script. Arguably, the actor probably improved it, and the director just let it be in there.
No, the actor
And
probably told off the crew. It's like, do you want to
yeah,
do another take? Piss off.
it's a 6.9 for that line alone. That
Alright,
makes this movie for me.
good. Alright,
Oh
now I'm
boy.
happy. Now I can die easy. Oh, sorry. I almost forgot, Drew. I meant to ask this at the beginning. But now that we finished up our discussion on Watership Down, I have a question to ask. At the recent Oscars, they addressed that animation was for kids, for little babies. How do you feel about that? As an animator, how does that make you feel?
Well, I'm a little bit radical about things, actually. Given what the Oscars actually were this year, I
Mm,
personally love animation for children. I think that it can be some of the most emotionally sincere and charming films out there. I've personally worked on plenty of animated content for younger audiences. But when you've got a movie like Flea up against like Encanto, I truly believe that the animated category for Oscars is is not a good category for judgment. Imagine if there was a best film shot on 35 millimeter film. You'd end up with comedies against dramas, against like mysteries and science fictions. I think that it would be probably more appropriate to have such films slotted into best musical, best comedy, or best drama. Because I can't think of any other context where you'd have a story about a man escaping the Iraq War up against a magical Disney Pixar movie about like magic and mythology and family bonding.
and child slavery.
Which is all of them. That's all of them. That's literally all of Disney, which is it's like they have this facade of uniqueness, like, oh, we are representing this under represented culture now, and look at all these beautiful things, but we're applying the exact same formula and story, just so when your parents put on a Disney movie, they know what to expect, and they don't have to uh, pay attention to their kids for the next 2 hours. Um, that's
Perfect.
Disney's winning formula in a nutshell.
Was
I
Cruella winning best costume design over Dune not bad enough, Disney? Come on.
Uh, I mean,
I
Dune did win like 5 awards. I
That's
was happy
true.
with that.
But not best director. Wasn't even nominated.
Ah, I know. What a
Well, don't
stinger.
worry, part two. Part two will get him that best director nomination.
Yes.
Just you wait. And with that, let's move on to even more nightmare fuel and a movie I watched while I was having a fever that made me feel like I was experiencing a fever dream. Alice.
So, Alice, or as the original title in Czech uh, calls it, Neko z Alenski, which I'm probably butchering the hell out of,
I linked.
translating to something of Alice, which is alluding to the fact that this is rather a loose, surrealistic adaptation of Alice in Wonderland. So it takes this very familiar story that's been super popular amongst children's literature and film adaptations for decades now, ever since the 1800s, and it totally spins it in this absolutely nightmarish live action stop animation hybrid that will permeate anyone's subconscious, uh, whoever watches it. And I loved every second of this movie. I don't know how to describe it. Um, this was something that's been on my list for a while. And again, I want to shout out to Saria for suggesting this one. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here tonight, but damn, I'm really glad I finally saw this one. This is from the infamous stop animation director Jan Spankenmajor. I'm probably butchering that. Um, and apparently, this was his first feature film that he directed. He had done a bunch of short films and a bunch of other little art projects since, and you can find him all over YouTube. His work has been a huge influence on people like Terry Gilliam and other people who just find this work rather compelling. It's just a fascinating film, and man, I don't even know where to begin with this one. But what did you guys think of it?
Well, my letterbox review promptly says what dot the dot fuck dot, and I feel like that perfectly sums it up. I was speaking with Drew about it earlier, and I told him there's no way this isn't how is this 1988? There's no way this isn't secretly a 70s giallo film, and it made me wonder if this film was stuck in development hell or they just had a nightmare of a time
Well,
releasing it. Like, it feels, and I don't mean this in a bad way necessarily, it feels a lot older than it actually is. Like, this came out the same year as Die Hard. This came out the
well,
same
it's
year
just,
as Akira, I'm pretty sure.
I
Or at least
imagine it was
around the same
very
time.
I was imagining this would be very indie kind of budget, and it probably was in production for quite a while because doing stop motion animation is probably the most laborious process
Oh, for
to
sure.
animate anything. So, although, the main actress that they have here, this young girl, she stays pretty consistent. So they probably filmed her stuff probably right up front, and then they did the animations afterwards. I don't know how the production was on this. It might have been done really quickly as far as I can tell. But yeah, I mean, in the 80s for an 80 budget, um, yeah, I guess that would contribute to how it looks. Though it does definitely feel like a late 70s film for sure.
Even the way it's
I
shot, like the cinematography itself, like lots of zooms, lots of, like, split
Close-ups.
frames, yeah, close-ups,
I
lots of
I,
wide
I, I like I
shots.
like they have that kind of just close up of her mouth throughout the entire thing, narrating it, which is really bizarre and probably unnerving for a lot of people.
Incredibly. But it was very effective. Like, this film, I joke about how trippy it is, but I think it works really well. And
Yeah.
it does, it's obviously going for that fever dream vibe. It's going for the vibe of the kind of nightmare you'd experience as a little kid that you just,
Yeah.
you can't quite put your finger on, you can't quite explain. And there's lots of great
Mhm.
ways to kind of reflect that. But Drew, I want to
And
know what you think about this movie.
man, this like I completely agree with you, Devin. I think that this like I'm really glad that I've seen this movie now because I swear this movie feels like I can tell right now somebody on the Lost Wikimedia forums on Reddit is talking about this thing and trying to track it down.
Me
Oh
Um,
too.
yeah.
this this movie has such an interesting and compelling aesthetic. And compared to the other films on the list for this evening, it is significantly slower paced. It really does feel like a mix between surrealism and storytelling and just what a young, extremely bored girl in a dilapidated home in the Czech Republic could daydream. The fact that many of the characters are reused props and elements that would fit around this child's home really helps bring this movie into a place between pure fantasy and unpleasantly grounded realism. That being said, which rabbit is more disturbing? The white rabbit from Czech Republic Alice or any of the dying rabbits from Watership Down?
I
Alice.
think this one takes the cake.
Yeah.
The taxidermy animals that they puppeteer for this, ugh, it's so unnerving. Just looking at
It's
their like
so
bulging
uncomfortable.
eyes, and I don't know
Oh,
if it was intentionally like meant to be like eye bulging and disturbing like that, probably. But yeah, this whole film plays out like a fever dream that she probably had after blacking out from drinking ink, because that's literally what the subtitle came up as, that she's like drinking ink and chewing on wood. I'm like, don't do that. Where are your parents? Stop doing that.
Well, the
Get
parents
some
are
help.
off in the war. It's Czechoslovakia, so
Oh,
fortunately they probably.
I mean,
I'm
no,
sorry.
that this is it's really kind of disturbing that, this is exactly what your brain would kind of concoct if you're drinking something you shouldn't be.
Yeah, it's
And
like it's that feeling of what's that meme? Oh, sorry. This isn't weed, Scoob. Uh,
yes.
this is something very bad. I wanted to ask what you guys think of the fucking snake hand puppet with the teeth and like the
oh god,
eyes bulging
the
out.
the caterpillars, they call them
Yeah,
caterpillars.
that was just like the most.
Oh
It's
god.
so creative and so fun, and the jankiness is definitely. I feel like it's a mix of intentional, but also a lot of happy accidents. That it just
Mhm.
happened to work out that way, but probably wasn't
You
intended to
have to
necessarily
admire
work
at the
that bad.
very least the creativity on
Yeah,
display here. Like every
absolutely.
sequence has some, type of animation, some type of thing I never would have expected. Like this rabbit constantly has fucking sawdust falling out of it, and he always licks it back up. And
Oh
it
god.
didn't get any more, like it didn't get any less unsettling every time he did it too. And then there's that whole Mad Hatter sequence where the guy's like putting butter in watches.
Oh
I
yeah,
You know,
that was my favorite
for our
sequence.
for our casual listeners, sometimes we talk in a non-linear manner. We just sort of jump right into the movies, having seen them ourselves. But for our casual listeners who don't really know what the heck we're talking about or in what order we're discussing things, this time it's fine. Things just sort of happen in this movie.
Yeah, and that's very intentional from the director's part. Like he had expressed disappointment with other adaptations of this story of Carol's work, and because they always would interpret it as a fairy tale, where he wanted to instead make it more like a sort of an amoral dream. Like it is just sort of like a dream where just a bunch of things kind of happen and you're not sure what to make of it. And that's exactly what it plays out like. Like there isn't necessarily a moral guide here. There's just a bunch of things that happen and they're a little unnerving and kind of under your skin. But I don't know, I really appreciated that for some reason. Like that there isn't some message he's trying to hammer in here exactly. It's more just again the kind of visions that you would have if you're like a young kid trying to understand the world around you, and if there's these insurmountable objects that you're not sure how to interact with. I also love the fact that every time she tries to open the door, the handle just comes off.
Yeah,
like I love,
there were a lot of reoccurring motifs in this movie.
Yeah, and I'm
yeah, a lot,
kind of curious if
and
there's
lots of like little like yeah, almost like recurring jokes in that sense.
yeah, a lot of
Maybe
yeah.
for our audience's sake, did this movie remind you guys of any other movies you've seen?
House. From
Yes.
1977. Although I think that film actually, I would say that film kind of succeeds with a lot more, and it hitting some emotional resonance. And we have to talk about that movie at
House
some
is
point.
also
But
a
this
lot
is
more
up
goofy
there.
than this movie.
Oh,
House is
House is a
a
lot
lot
more.
more
House
goofy.
is a lot more everything. But
Yeah.
I'd still put this up there. Like
I
this
think this is
is.
better than House, to be honest.
Oh, really?
That I
Interesting.
kind of felt more from this story, to be honest, because
I
I
loved this movie, but I would say almost objectively House is better, but I still like him.
Well, if you guys ever
House
want
is
to do
better
a
made. House has like better technical aspects, but I feel like it's a very simple story, but it wasn't trying to be anything more than that. The characters are literally named after their emotions and like what their wants and
Funny
desires are.
because this it's funny because this came out 11 years after House. Like House is 77, this was 88.
But it feels
Actually,
like it
funny
could have been the
thing,
same time.
I didn't even notice until I was putting the banner together tonight that all these films came out a decade apart from each other. 78, 88, and 98 later.
Oh wow.
Potential
Yeah.
trilogy.
Well, and I mean, hey, if you guys ever want to do a surrealist film night, you could toss on what the heck is it? Louis Brunel and Salvador Dali's Un Chien Andalou, and
Oh
maybe
yes.
toss on House.
Fuck yeah. I'm down for that.
Yeah,
But
Unchan Andalou is a neat little film.
Well, because
And
it's
that's what
it's
this,
it's like, yeah, like Unshen Delu's like the original best troll moment in cinema history. But we'll get into that another time.
we,
But
and
we
possibly
certainly
inspired
will.
Pan's Labyrinth. Uh,
yeah.
Huh.
we'll get into that at a different time. But back to Alice. I think what made this film work for me more was it did just resonate with me more because the fever dream analogy is accurate and very intentional. Like, I feel like I've shared these dreams. I feel like I've had these visions as a kid, like all these dreams that you just can't quite explain. And there's so much creativity in the filmmaking, not just with the stop motion animation, but just like how it's shot. Like, I love this scene where uh, was it the mouse? I'm getting the characters mixed up, but the mouse is like climbing the mountain. But the way they shot it was they clearly just shot it in a desert, and they angled it just right that the rocks look like they're going in an upward slope. And that's such a creative and fun way to shoot a scene like that. It's like instead of going to a mountain, let's just shoot at something from a slightly different angle. But because the mouse is so small, it looks like it's struggling and trying to climb. And it's such a simple and elegant solution that just drastically changes the feel of the scene. And there's a lot of scenes like that in this movie. It's just so much creativity on display. You never know what you're gonna get, but it doesn't feel pointless either. As weird as that
Oh.
sounds, like it doesn't feel like they just threw a bunch of shit at the screen and said, "Hey, there you go. It's funny and random for the sake of being funny and random." Like, I, I can't quite put my finger on it, but it does feel like there's a method to the madness here. It doesn't feel
Hmm.
as pointless or as random as something like, I don't know, like a town called Panic or something along those
Hmm.
lines. Like, I can't really put my finger on it, but you can tell like there's a voice and the vision here. It's not just spouting nonsense.
Well, I want to echo that really quickly because I strongly agree. Actually, much like Un Chien Andalou, there's I think that this deliberateness of the film is inescapable just because of the nature of how most of this film was actually made. You don't just accidentally film stop motion animation. It is
Yeah.
incredibly laborious and deliberate.
Yeah,
You have
so
to commit so much to the vision and to what you're doing that, you know, just by its nature, you're putting a lot of thought into the process at the very least. So I
yeah,
think that goes hand in hand with the message that he's trying to tell. Like, you're if you're going to commit this much time to it, then you really want it to be something worthwhile. And that's something that really comes across in all of the short films that I've seen from this person, is that there is some messaging here, that there is a perspective that he's trying to portray. There was this one short film that he did called what was it, Factual Conversation, or it's a part of this larger thing, and it just has these two like Play-Doh heads, and they kind of spit out these objects at each other that interact in a certain way. Like this one guy spits out a pencil, the other person spits out a sharpener. Okay, there's a clear kind of interaction between those two. And then the other one spits out a shoe, the other one spits out polish, and they interact. But then at some point they mix the things up and things kind of go into disarray. So it's like, people going from like having a coherent kind of conversation to being a little more surrealistic or a little more nonsensical. It's like if you're kind of, drunk, and suddenly your points just kind of meander and you're not sure where you're going with them anymore. I mean, I don't know. There's so many ways to interpret that kind of thing, but I just love that visual presentation of that kind of idea. And some of these things you can really only express in this medium, I feel, or in this kind of visual surrealistic way. There's just certain things that words can't quite express. Um, and I feel like he's kind of exploring the depths of that. Like he's trying to explore these different ways of expressing these ideas and these thoughts. And this, yeah, I don't know. I'm running out of words to explain it, which is,
Hey,
I think,
very
fitting.
fitting. Exactly.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Very,
And I
very
feel
fitting.
like I'll just say one more thing. I feel like Kurt Cobain had to have seen this film while on shrooms when writing music for Nirvana, because this is 100% his kind of aesthetic. Like if you've seen any of the other art that Kurt Cobain does, very in line with this, where it's just like a bunch of found childlike objects that have gotten all decrepit and decayed and, you know, just like pieces of random crap of rotting things with child's toys kind of thrown together. I feel like, yeah, that definitely affected Kurt Cobain and other artists like him.
It's an
Drew,
interesting
I have a question
observation.
for you. Have you heard of the Netflix animated anthology called The House?
Yes,
Stop
I
motion.
have, and it's actually been on my list.
Do you think it was potentially inspired by this movie? Because I watched a couple of part segments of The House, and the vibes of it did kind of remind me of this somewhat, especially some of the dream sequences in The House.
I would argue that a lot of stop motion animation, for one reason or another, lends itself very nicely to being either unsettling or surrealist. How many, iconic Leica animation films do we have at this point? Like Coraline, we've got Nightmare Before
Yeah,
Christmas, we've
very
got,
Coraline.
we've got this sort of Alice, and we've got another one I want to see at some
Paranormal.
point is Phil Tippett's Mad God.
Yes,
Oh,
that
yes, you need to see
man,
that.
that has
Holy
been, I
shit,
mean, that's
it's
been in
so good.
production for what, 30 years now? Like he's been
Just
working
about.
on it off and on for decades.
See,
And
what I think is the most beautiful part of using the stop motion for that is imagine doing 30 years worth of CG animation. It'd look horrible by now, but stop motion, the puppets are just as real as they were 30 years ago.
wow.
I know it's holds up incredibly well, and I think this movie will hold up incredibly well because it does feel old-fashioned, but it's so inspired and creative that like it just gets into your head. Like I don't know how else to explain it. Like there's great
Uh,
music, there's great sound design, the editing is really bizarre and choppy, but I think intentionally so. What you think of the main kid's performance? Like I feel like we've been dancing around that much longer than we should
Um,
have.
she probably put up with a lot of stuff on this film. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know what the child labor laws were like in Czechoslovakia
No.
back then. I mean, I don't think she did anything too dangerous, but it is very unnerving just seeing her chug down ink and chew on wood. I mean, she probably wasn't doing that for real, but it's like, God, where are your parents?
Yeah, God, yeah, just nails that feeling altogether. I feel like she was
Yeah.
good. There was a few parts where, like, maybe the direction wasn't quite clear, and like she wasn't reacting to things that she should have, but it wasn't enough to distract me from the experience. I think she did a really solid job overall. Her screams were very convincing. Like, again, I don't know what Czechoslovakian laws were back then, but did you just like show this girl a spider? Did you hit this girl? Like, how'd you get those genuine screams in there? It's very
Oh man.
unsettling, but it adds to the vibe very well. I feel like
Th-
screams were the
There's
most
that whole
convincing part of her
scene where
performance.
I remember that whole scene where like the rabbit's trying to like hunt her down or get her out of this house,
God, yeah,
and he starts like attacking her with like a little saw blade, and she pushes him into this glass kind of enclosure. Like it got violent at some point. Like damn.
yeah. Damn, the whole film was like that though. When it came around, it's like this is horrifying, but the rest of the film is horrifying. It makes me feel like I'm experiencing a fever dream. This isn't really too far off the deep end.
Well,
I
what
don't
I
But
know.
really like to know is do you think that American McGee, when making his Alice games, took inspiration from this?
100%. I was so happy you brought that up. Well, those games definitely feel like more brutal, and there is like a very clear allegory with in the first game. There's a clear allegory of like Alice having to accept the fact that she, was responsible for the death of her parents, and the sequel is not to spoil anything, but to kind of reveal the curtain of who was behind it the whole time and how that's kind of changed her lifestyle in a way. Here, it's much more ambiguous. Like, yeah, there's certain things you could tie into, like, maybe the animals are like an allegory for how abusive her parents are or how lonely she is, and there's a lot of like imagery with the doors. There's a lot of like imagery of water. There's water is like a constant pressure for the main character. Maybe she has a fear of drowning. I read a theory somewhere that her parents drowned in an accident, and she's living with her step parents, and that's why there's so much horrifying water imagery in the film, and like, and that's why like the caterpillar is this weird covered sock puppet that's always like wet and nasty and gross. Like it's much more subtle than even American McGee's work, but I guarantee you 100% it was inspired by this. Also, I'd
Hmm.
argue the second best interpretation of Alice. Fuck Tim
Oh.
Burton's Alice in Wonderland interpretation. I know he went through a lot of creative differences, and Disney basically got to the point where it's like, we just want this to be a generic hero's journey. But Tim Burton should have put up more of a fight, man. Like a story like that deserves so much better.
So you would put the Tim Burton one just above this?
No, Tim Burton
Oh
is
no.
at the bottom. No, I hate the Tim Burton
Oh,
version.
Tim Burton to the bottom. Okay, so what's the best
American
adaptation then?
I'd say I have a soft spot for American McGee. If I enjoyed the actual gameplay of the American McGee Alice games, like the atmosphere and the storytelling is fantastic on those games, but the gameplay is kind of terrible. But I mean, in terms of story and atmosphere, those are still probably number one. But I'd say this is a close second for sure. Like I really connected with this much more than fun, and it flies by too. Like it's slow and deliberate, but there's enough creativity there that you just never know what you're gonna get, and that makes the experience like
Hmm.
constantly exciting and engaging.
You
Yeah,
know
So I'd
what?
say this is
I
number two.
there's a constant kind of through line to things. Like even though logically some things don't make sense, there's just this unfolding of events that follows a dream logic that I'm constantly kind of glued to the screen, like what's going to happen next, and there's some kind of sense to it, but it's not the typical sense that that you're used to, which is very intriguing. Like it feels like an emotional kind of roller coaster in a sense.
Hmm.
That's actually very well said. I wanna agree with that because in a cinema landscape where we have so many movies that are shot relatively conventionally and follow relatively conventional storylines, I was thoroughly invested in just what was going to happen next. The pacing is different from what I'm used to. The editing is different from what I'm used to. The character acting, I actually think that, for a little girl whose stage direction seems to generally be look at something, I think this girl actually does quite a darn good job, and I'm really glad that a movie like this exists. I think it's quite inspiring to see, movies can be wildly artistic and experimental if you feel like it.
Hmm.
I also love off the bat with the narration of this. They she deliberately tells you that this is a film made for kids, and and it's kind of fourth wall breaking, which is really interesting. Like it
It
directly
reminded me of
implies
a series of
implies
unfortunate
the viewer,
events. Yeah.
but also I don't know. She says a line that I thought was super fascinating, and I was almost tempted to do this, but I decided against it. Um, was close your like you have to really see this film, you have to close your eyes, or else you won't see anything. Like that's interesting. I don't know. I like I like that line. I was
That's
almost tempted to do so.
no. Then you miss out on all of the gorgeous imagery. That's
Well,
that was
I
it.
don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something about the sound design that they were really proud of. I'm not sure what the point of that line was, but it's I don't know. It's that kind of opening dialogue that really throws you into what this film is about and kind of intrigues you, like
Hmm. I
to
want to
maybe not trust your senses, or maybe to try to be a little more open-minded about what you're about to experience.
I think I want to give a huge shout out to the sound design in this movie because for a film that only has two songs, the opening and ending credits, this movie is either quietness or silence or atmospheric sound design the whole way through. And I
Yeah,
genuinely appreciated that.
a
Yeah.
lot of
Made it very
Foley
effective.
work as well. Like, and
Hmm.
I don't know if it's like Foley work that doesn't quite match, but there's something just so intimate and in your face. It's almost like anti-ASMR, like if like fingernails scratching on the chalkboard was pleasant for people, kind of ASMR, you know? But it does feel like very just visceral, which I think is very effective with the stop motion animation. And there's something about them switching to live action, shot at 24 frames per second in a camera, to cutting to probably 12 frame animation. I'm not sure what they were animating on. Could you uh, were you able to pick that out, Drew, just from like looking at it? Is there a consistent frame rate when they're doing that animation, or is it kind of all over the place?
I think it was a little bit all over the place. There are some scenes that you can kind of see the puppets stuttering a little bit at a lower frame rate, but there were a few
Hmm.
moments like the the oh gosh, I really like the lower frame rate is just fast enough for when Alice is transforming between her human self and the doll. But there are many scenes of the doll running around or climbing an object that I'm pretty sure were like really smoothly animated.
Yeah, or sometimes they just had it like moving kind of statically because they wanted to get the shot. Like any time that the rabbit had sawdust falling out of it, that was just shot in real time.
Yes.
Um, but just the cutting back and forth between those frame rates just had a weird, interesting effect that added to the surrealism, just by nature of how it was made.
What would you
I don't know.
guys?
I really dug this
Yeah,
one. I'm gonna give it a 9.
damn. I'm gonna go a
Nice.
little bit lower. It's an 8.5 out of 10, but it's a strange, wonderful, bizarre experience that appropriately made me feel like I was having a fever dream. So thanks for that.
You're
Hmm.
welcome.
I
What about you, Drew?
I'm very glad that I now know what this movie is, and I can tell people about it, and they'll think I'm quoting a piece of like creepypasta indie film work. I give Czechoslovakian Alice a oh gosh, I'm sorry, lads. I'm giving it a 7.5 out of 10. There are
Why'd you
some
hate
films I've seen.
it?
They're a little bit more either visually intense or thematically gripping, but I genuinely enjoyed this movie. It was properly unsettling at times, but in a good way. I had a good time with this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this is a movie well, okay, I guess here's a question. Is this a movie you would show your kids?
Yes, I think I would. Like if they had a bad dream or they had a dream they couldn't explain, I'd almost show this film as a way to kind of comfort them and maybe ask like, was it something like this? Like maybe this girl is going through what you're going through, and maybe
A
you could figure it out
disclaimer, none of
together.
us have kids, by the way.
No,
Just
yeah,
just
none of
just
us
to
have kids.
get that
No.
out of the mind. This is
Yeah, sorry.
completely, just out of our ass kind of ideas. I think if we actually did, we probably would have very different ideas.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
I
we
I
would
don't
I
know.
would not.
I've it's like this isn't so like graphic as like Watership Down, and it isn't so obvious what's so horrible about it, but it kind of exists in this middle ground where you're unnerved, but you're not exactly sure why. There's a lot of uncanny valley-ness to it, and I think the taxidermy animals, where you have this thing that was alive, but now it's being reanimated in this unnatural way, that just in and of itself is super unsettling to just look at, even as an adult. Like I was more viscerally unnerved by this than Watership Down, just for
Yeah, I'm with you.
completely different reasons. And it's
Hmm.
hard to like I'm like laughing at this as I'm watching it just because it's so, bizarre and out there. But I also my brain's kind of having a hard time categorizing it as well. So I feel like this would be even more terrifying for kids just to,
Oh, it would be,
you know,
but you gotta break them early. Don't take my
I
advice. I'm a crazy person. Also, Devin, I wanted to mention, the composer for the American Mickey Alice games is Chris Vrenna. Do you know who Chris
oh,
Vrenna is?
not by name, but
Chris Vrenna
what?
was originally, he formed the band Tweaker, but more importantly, he was part of Nine Inch Nails.
Oh, sick.
I figured
That's
you'd
pretty
want to know
cool.
that. Yeah, and his soundtrack for
Yeah.
the Alice games is so good. Like,
I mean,
definitely look up
it.
the opening, the main menu theme to American McGee's Alice. It is something else.
I mean,
That's
that
all I'll
makes sense
say.
because I know Trent Reznor's been doing scores for video games and movies for many years, and So yeah, it made sense that other members of Nine Inch Nails would have split off and done projects, and because that also happened with Radiohead, like a lot of the main members of that group have all done film scores now.
Hmm.
Um,
Especially
and
around the
uh,
time.
recently, a little while ago, we talked about Tom York's score for Suspiria, which I thought was actually quite excellent. Um, and Johnny Greenwood's also done a lot of great score work, and he used to, or is part of Radiohead still, I think, but has since become like a prolific composer. So yeah,
Well,
Nice.
lads, I want to ask from a movie with almost no music to a movie that can definitely be counted amongst some really impressive musicals. Our final film of the evening is Prince of Egypt.
God
great
damn
segue.
great segue. I'm proud of you.
I have learned from the best.
Go for it,
Um,
man.
Spoilers.
this one, oh boy. Okay. Yeah, following in our 11-year segments, 1998 DreamWorks film The Prince of Egypt is with like full bias on display. My favorite movie of the evening. It is for those who might be unaware of it. It is an animated musical adaptation of the Hebrew text, the Abrahamic text, the Book of Exodus. It is the story of the Hebrew people who are enslaved in the nation of Egypt and how one man rises out of them to defy the ruling pharaohs of Egypt and bring the Hebrew people out of slavery in Egypt and into the wilderness in an exodus. This is a movie that I'm actually going to be fairly light on the details of because of all the movies this evening, this is the one I would most strongly recommend our audience. If they haven't seen this one, it is legitimately worth your time. Artistically, thematically, all of my bias on display here. I love this movie. And if you've ever been in any church or synagogue in like all of Canada or America or many parts of Europe, all over the world, they'll probably have a copy of this movie somewhere on a bookshelf.
Probably on VHS too, in those old like clamshell cases, which
Oh,
Exactly.
heck yeah.
I'm pretty
Um,
sure we still have somewhere. But yeah, man, I remember seeing this as a kid and loving it, and it was just one of the films that was in regular circulation. You know, same with El Dorado and
yes.
Atlantis. Like those are the movies that tended to get rewatched in the VCR quite a bit. They're just fantastic pieces of film, and I hadn't like revisited this since then, and it was really just fascinating to come back to it and re-experience the story again because it's been years. Um,
And how
If
does it
I may,
hold up?
really quickly,
Go for
I
it.
think for our general audience, I think that we're going to be talking about this film mythologically. We're if we're talking about the story or characters or critiquing things, this is an animated adaptation of a mythological story that millions of people around the world hold dear to their hearts, and so that's the context, I think. We're not going to be talking about any story points or any characters with a criticism towards an actual religion. This is an adaptation of a mythological story.
Yes, thank you. It's
And
important to
that, and I
address.
actually that was one thing I noticed off the bat was the disclaimer right at the beginning, which I thought was very well written. It's
Hmm.
this is
Yeah,
the
very
perfect way
tasteful.
to cover their asses for uh, in terms of creating taking. So they're saying that this is we take creative liberties here, but we feel like we've true to the spirit of the story, and we're very respectful, and the original story can be written here. Please don't sue us. And I think that that's a yeah, it's almost an unnecessary disclaimer because I thought they did an excellent job with the story. Like I was raised uh Christian, although I don't hold myself that religiously these days. But I still saw this as probably one of the best adaptations of this story. And I think a lot of people that I knew growing up, I don't think anyone's ever passionately expressed problems with this, the way that it's depicted. There's probably people out there that have very particular views on this and probably will split hairs and reject certain ideas. But I think ultimately this story is absolutely very respectful to the source material and really tells it in a very beautiful way.
Well, and I'm no theologian myself, but I am constantly struck by the amount of effort and love and dedication put into the tasteful stylization of the characters, the land of Egypt, the acting,
Yeah.
the crafting of the story itself. It's all very tasteful, and I'm trying to recall just how many. There's some ridiculous number of people like that the writers actually consulted, from theologians to historians and even contemporary religious figures, to discuss the like sensitivity and the delicacy with which this story is presented. And I believe that it holds remarkably strong to this day. I think uh, you're going to see this movie among the top tens of most DreamWorks aficionados.
I think this is their magnum opus. Personally, like I think this is easily their best film, but
Hmm.
and much like Disney's magnum opus, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, I'll fight you on that. It is almost ruined by the comedic relief duo, but the film is so good that it overcomes that. So that's yeah, this film is fantastic. It's one of the most gorgeously animated movies ever made. Like just the combination of the canvas painting elements, the rare use of CGI, all of the gorgeous hand drawn scenery and great character designs. It's just fantastic. Like I watched this movie on 4K and it looks brand new. Like this came out
Damn.
years ago and it really just felt like I captured it once again. Like A, great 4K transition work. Some of those can be a little choppy, but yeah, nothing was lost in the transition here. And B, just a testament to how well the animation holds up. And on a real quick side note, Drew, which Michelle Pfeiffer Disney animated movie is better, Sinbad or The Prince of Egypt?
Oh, don't make me
I'm
choose.
making you choose. Do it.
Um, for sheer artistic caliber, and that's what I'll describe Prince of Egypt from start to finish. This movie is capital A art. I will say that I think that this is just the strongest movie of all of DreamWorks' early and maybe even later films. Sinbad will always have a special place in my heart, though. I'm fully biased towards Sinbad, but I just cannot deny the absolute gravity that Prince of Egypt carries.
And you mentioned the
That's my.
music before. Like I feel like music needs to be addressed, but not just the lyrical songs. The original score, my boy Hans Zimmer, fantastic orchestral music. I love the leitmotif they use for God. Like every time, like he has an influence in the scene, and it does a little, oh, like lots of great little leitmotifs for the different characters and the different events of the story. That just really helps drive the experience together. I feel like that's an underrated aspect of the film because while the songs are mostly fantastic, except for Steve Martin's fucking song, which we'll get to in a little bit. I just hate those two characters so much, but we'll get into that.
Playing with the big boys now.
Oh,
I actually
but,
like that one.
but I don't know if I do
Lads, I
because the
guess we're
rest of
getting
this.
into it now.
Let's get into it now because every other
I,
song.
I will say this. I will say this though. Just talking about the music briefly and
Yeah,
leitmotifs. I like the fact that he had recognition of a melody that his, I guess, sister sang when he didn't recognize her after being estranged for all these years. But when she sang this tune, he like
yeah,
recognized it from his infancy.
that was
I thought that
fantastic.
that was a very powerful moment. And I like how they used music for that.
Yeah, that was great. But the thing is, every other song, but playing with the big boys now has a purpose. It
Oh,
not only a purpose,
I
but it
disagree with that, but all
drives
right.
the emotions of the characters immensely. Like the plagues, like it's not just a song telling us about the plagues and how horrible those events were. It's a dichotomy of the two brothers and their mentalities. Like you know, Moses genuinely believes that this is the only way, and they're both trying to convince themselves that they're right when they both believe that they're wrong. They're just so both caught up in their ways just from two different perspectives. And it tells us that through the music and of itself, and it's so interesting, and so many great moments like that, like the opening scene, the song the mom sings, "Deliver Us." I
Deliver
believe
us.
"Deliver Us."
Deliver
It's a
us.
great
Mhm.
song that opens up the movie, but it's also like a great interpretation of a mom trying to comfort their child and telling them what the world's gonna be like in a comforting way. Like every song has an extra gravitas to it. Playing with the Big Boys now just feels like we need a song for a silly comic relief duo to sing. It's gorgeously animated. I love the smoke effects and all of the like shadows and the lighting is great, but it's the only song in the movie that is like, all right, this just feels like a Disney number, and I mean that in the bad way, where it's like it just
Mm.
this is the part of the movie where we sing, where no other song felt like that to me. But
Where it's like the one song I remember going into this. It just I like probably I just liked it as a kid. I don't know, but it might be a little bit nostalgia. But I don't
I
know.
think,
It's just kind of it's cheesy and it just kind of works for me. I
well,
dig it.
it's a
yeah,
gorgeously animated scene. I'll give it that.
Hmm.
I think that's an important, reoccurring thing without this movie, about this movie is that absolutely no corners feel like they were cut. The animation is top notch from like the second this film starts. I do definitely agree. I think that particular song is the lowest point in this movie for me.
Hmm.
I remember as a kid, I thought that it was kind of fun and kind of charming. And for younger audiences, I get it because this is quite a genuinely heavy story. So
Hmm.
having a sense of levity or a comedic relief moment, I definitely understand why it's
I
there.
don't know.
As an adult, I kind of wish it wasn't, but I definitely can empathize with why it is included because, as we will get into later on in this movie, spoilers for a story that's over 2,000 years old, things don't go so well for the Egyptians or the Hebrews.
No.
No way.
What? You don't say.
Uh,
Spoilers.
I, I,
God.
I, I I thought you were gonna say like a movie that's over 20 years old, but no, the story's even older than that.
it is. It's
Yeah.
with any good mythological adaptation, I think that animation was probably the best possible outlet they could have chosen. There's enough stylization, but enough realism. There's enough heart and emotion, but there's also a little bit of theater to it. You've got,
Yeah, it's very theatrical.
genuinely A-list actors like Patrick Stewart as the Pharaoh Seti. Like, holy cow!
Yeah. Oh, my boy, Ray Fiennes, one of my favorite actors. He just does
Hmm.
such a great job of the character. Like he's a little maniacal at parts, but it definitely fits the tone of the movie, and there is weight behind his character beyond that the actor does a great job of exploring. And Val Kilmer is a good voice actor. Who knew? He
Wow.
does a great job.
I didn't
He's
even recognize
Moses.
it.
Yeah.
I didn't even recognize that was him at first, but yeah, I mean, he was solid in this.
Yeah,
And
Jeff
Ralph Fiennes,
Goldblum.
you could argue, is very heavily typecast as the maniacal villain, but
He nails it.
he's just so good at it. He's
He's
so
good
good
at
at
Well,
it.
it.
It works.
But he
now
also
thinking of
has like he definitely sells like the more emotional moments that his character does have. I'd argue, like he isn't
this
just
is
maniacal for the
something.
sake of it.
Oh, sorry.
Go on.
This is something that I don't necessarily often bring up with you guys, but I really want to bring it up for Prince of Egypt. Thinking about Val Kilmer and some of the artistic and editing choices of this movie, like having Kilmer's voice as both Moses and as the voice of God in the burning bush. What did you guys think of the editing in this movie?
It's
Hmm.
excellent.
I really like the sequence when he's like outcast or when he kind of leaves the the main city and he's just kind of in the outskirts and he's walking amongst all the sharp rocks and I don't know, I love that whole sequence and the way it unfolded and then him also finding the burning bush that I still had chills watching that scene. Like I had chills when I was watching when I was younger and I was surprised to feel the same way while watching it again. And then this is still probably my favorite scene and it's like the most probably the darkest scene in the whole film, and it's almost completely silent, and that's when the plague comes and kills all the firstborns,
The
which
prophecy,
would have
the
been me,
prophecy, the prophecy, the
probably. I
prophecy.
mean, just no, like that whole sequence where you just have this like white mist coming out of the sky. It feels like some Eldritchian god kind of
It's
mist creature
horrifying, and
coming
the
through.
whispering
It
that
is.
just slowly like enters in. Like
Just
there's a lot of like great fades, like great fade
it's just
ins
like
and
the
fade
breath,
outs.
just Yeah,
Just slowly
like that's all
breathing
you
in.
hear is the sound of the breath, and
Uh,
it's subtly terrifying.
it is properly haunting. Like each one of the plagues in this movie is represented with such genuine artistic integrity and weight. The expression on Ramsey's face when when the river turns to blood is just properly iconic. But I think that sequence, the death of the firstborns, is one of the most grim pieces of any mythology that I know of, and to have it handled so delicately, so hauntingly, and tastefully at the same time. Because this, like, make no two ways about it. As opposed to any given Disney movie, this is a sequence of the death of an uncountable number of infants. And so to have something like this presented in a way that is not, I don't believe, in any way needlessly exaggerated or tasteless in any way, that's probably one of the true triumphs of this movie, among its many triumphs.
Absolutely, I think this is the perfect example of showing kind of a tragic or awful thing very tastefully, like just being very, um, yeah, just poignant in its execution.
The solemnity of so many moments in this film constantly impresses me, regardless of how many times I've gone back to watch this darn thing. The moments where Moses and Ramses are, just talking with one another. I really like the character dynamic that these characters actually have, on screen. In the source text, things go by a little bit quickly, in my opinion, but here in the film, they've kind of taken a bit of artistic license, and you can see them growing up as brothers, and they can talk and they can argue. There's even this truly gloriously extended sequence where Moses comes to plead with Ramses, and I remember the line he cracks a joke, and he says, "Do you remember the time we switched the heads on the statues in the Temple of Ra?" And it's just so delicately animated. If you guys ever feel like watching some absolute masterclass character acting animation, you can find the pencil drawings before they've been colored and digitized, the pencil tests for that character acting of Moses, and it is among my favorite pieces of character acting in literally any film.
Lots of
I would,
really
yeah, I'd
expressive
love to
character
see that. If you
animations.
have a link to that, please send it my way,
Yeah,
because just
it's
seeing the rough sketch of how this is put together, I think would be absolutely invaluable for anyone that is interested in this medium at all. Like just seeing the whole process of them, because I feel like so much of, again, the character acting, a lot of it's the voice acting for sure, but also the intent of how their body language is drawn, like how their frame is kind of presented. Like I'm not sure all the technicalities here, but there is something about the timing of these exact character movements. Like in that whole sequence where he's walking away from Egypt and he just looks dejected in his body language, it just carries so much weight where he is just isn't sure what the right answer is anymore. I like that whole sequence where he just kind of has like given up. He's in the desert. He's getting rid of his gold kind of jewelry that he's adorned. And then he just gets caught up in the sandstorm, and then the next morning, it's like he has sand up to the top of his head, and then a camel comes and tries to eat his hair because he thinks it's greenery. Like I love that. I love that whole sequence, and it's all just told visually for the most part.
a
Like
lot
it's
of
all
this movie
just
is.
pure animation with score and telling the emotion of that scene, and it's very potent. And it's one of those. I mean, when you watch these as a kid, it just hits you a certain way emotionally that nothing else does. And coming back to it, it's almost like a time capsule. Like I'm reconnecting to how I felt watching this as a kid, and I just value that so much. And yeah, I loved coming back and rediscovering this film.
Also, I just realized something. The Prince of
Yeah,
Egypt was from the same director as B Movie. It's from the
no
What?
same
fucking way.
director as Steve Hickner. One of the directors also directed B Movie.
Incredible.
Jerry Seinfeld just ruins everything, even that
What a
director's career. That
What
it's
a fall
confirmed.
from grace.
Holy,
Or is it ascension? Is it a fall from grace or is it ascension into memehood? I don't know.
what the fuck? How do you
This
go
is
from
incredible.
how?
I
Jesus
mean,
Christ, that's
it's
a
just as
harder fall from
baffling.
career than M Night Shyamalan. That's a harder fall from career than
Well,
Neil Blomkamp. Like holy shit.
you also have Ridley Scott, who directed Gladiator and Aliens and so many other great films.
Like
And then
Exodus,
he
Gods and Kings.
and then he also did Exodus, Gods and Kings. So
Jesus.
everyone has their moments.
Yeah, I guess so. It just peak and immediately die out and have a heart attack, and that's obviously what happened to B
Fuck.
movie. Talk about a good movie, Prince of Egypt. The relationship between the brothers is what carries this movie the most for me. It's just a great dynamic because, like, yeah,
Mhm.
they're against each other the entire movie, but you can tell like a part of them do care about each other in very subtle ways, and they could have done more awful actions to each other, but they just choose not to, and it's very interesting to see that fleshed out in a kids movie adaptation when arguably stuff like that can be lost in translation, especially in like DreamWorks or the world of DreamWorks or Disney. But I'm really impressed that they handled it with a level of maturity in the story along with just about everything else. And we haven't even talked about parting the Red Sea and how like they animate like just the amount of detail and the whale. Like you spent all of that time drawing a whale. Like who thinks of that shit? It's amazing.
I
Like
love
so
that
much
scene.
attention
Love
to detail.
seeing all the sea animals in the water as they're walking through.
Yeah,
That whole sequence is beautifully animated.
it's the music is fantastic. Like I love how they always like tease God himself with the like subtle like chanting, but then the chanting is at full effect for a long period of time. You just get this that feeling of finally encountering a miracle is just sitting in with the music alone. And then it immediately like transitions to something much more intense when Ramses finally charges in. It's just man, such a good movie that unfortunately had to have Steve Martin and whoever the other comic relief obnoxious dumbass is.
You're
It's
you're not gonna get off of that now,
no,
are you?
I'm not. It's like it's not as bad as the Hunchback of Notre Dame gargoyles, but it's close for me. I don't know. There's something about that just really drives me nuts. Like I don't know, something like Beauty and the Beast shows that you can have comic relief characters with characters like Gaston, but not completely detract from the film's tone and remind me that I'm watching an animated movie. Like I don't know, there's ways to do it right, but they just go a little too far in this. And Hunchback of Notre Dame and now How to Train Your Dragon even does that to a certain extent. It bugs me because otherwise these are excellent movies that just had to be a product of their time in one way or another. But such a minor complaint that I don't know, it just grinds my goat. Anyways, the rest of this movie is fantastic. It's beautifully
Sure.
animated, great music, great voice acting,
Mhm.
great dynamic. Like, what else can I say about it? Tons of people have talked about this movie already and praised it.
I don't know. Well, Jiro, I have a question for you. I know that you have a little hobby of collecting artifacts and things from various animation productions, be it like backgrounds or animated cells. Um, how much do you think a cell from this film would go for?
Well,
I
as far
think.
as I'm aware, I don't think this movie was actually done on cells. I think that DreamWorks went all out and digitized the pencil
Oh,
lines and cleaned them up digitally. Um,
you think they went full
but
Wow.
George Lucas?
but as far as I can tell, even like a pencil sketch from this movie would rightfully be among someone's truly prized animation possessions. The art book. DreamWorks actually made an art book for The Prince of Egypt, and it is infamous for being sold out everywhere and impossible to find, and goes on eBay for genuinely breathtaking sums of money because, for heaven's sake, it's Prince of Egypt.
Hmm.
Let's see. Prince of Egypt art book. Or
I'm seeing a listing going
four hundred
for
eighty
like
nine
eight.
dollars and 82 cents.
Whew.
I mean, I pay
Oh,
it.
okay. And I'm seeing a coloring art book for $88 or 111
Well,
Canadian.
that's not the same. I'm looking at a new
That's
vision and animation, which is probably the
oh
legit
yeah.
version of it. Copyrighted material. Yep.
As I'm not entirely sure why that book is so properly out of print. I'm thoroughly convinced to this day if DreamWorks just did another run of that book, it would sell out instantaneously.
Oh yeah, there would be. It'd be like the PS5. Thousands of people would pawn it, and
Oh,
then it
I
would
would.
jack up in
Well,
price.
No, I wouldn't do something so slimy. I
Well,
would buy a
no,
copy
you
for
wouldn't,
myself.
but other people would.
Hmm.
Yes.
Even yeah, even the Art of Hercules, like that's selling for like $300 plus. It's just something about '90s animation is really selling out everywhere. Yeah, Art of Hercules, the chaos of creation. But did you know Hercules was from the same animator as Pink Floyd The Wall? They're the
Oh,
lead
Gerald
animator.
Scarfe is
Yeah,
he is oh man.
I that was very weird, but it did kind of answer a lot of questions. A lot of jagged images and shapes in that animation. But anyways, I don't know what else to add for the Princess of Egypt. I saw it just after finishing last episode, so it's not quite burned into my memory as much as the other two films. It's also not as much of a fever dream, but I loved it. It's great. You should go watch it. And watch this instead of Exodus Gods and Kings. It's half the length, and I felt twice as much from watching this. 9 out of 10. It's a great movie. Unfortunately, had Steve Martin in it. I love Steve Martin, but come on, man. Come on.
Even 9 as well. I think it's a solid film, and it holds
Yeah.
up as well as it did as I remember my childhood. And yeah, I remember for a while I was like just into ancient Egypt stuff for a bit, so I had like this film, the Mummy films, and I think Scorpion King just in constant circulation
Nice.
for a little while.
Nice.
Yeah,
What
it was
about you,
just part
Drew?
of the Egypt canon.
The
Well,
Egypt
you know
setback
what?
universe.
There are some inconsistent movies that take place in Egypt. I mean, actually, if you guys ever do next year for a Halloween episode, I've never seen the original Boris Karloff's The Mummy.
Mm.
You have you
Um,
seen the Brendan Fraser movie, The Mummy?
I have not seen Scorpion King.
Ooh.
Not the Scorpion, the original, the Mummy from the '90s, not the Scorpion
Oh,
King. With Brendan
um,
Fraser.
no, I swear I've seen like half of it on TV, but I've never seen the whole darn thing.
Oh man, it's a fun movie. It's really stupid and it gets billions of things wrong about Egyptian
I
history and
remember.
culture, but it's a really fun movie.
I remember we were watching it one time in class in high school, and like I'd seen it when I was a kid. I really liked it as a kid, and I hadn't seen it in like years up to that point. And this was like history class that we were watching The Mummy, and I just remember sitting there, just noticing all these dumb things, and just writing a whole page, just kind of essay to myself of things wrong with The Mummy. And that was like my first kind of foray into film
Everything
criticism.
wrong with. Yeah, it's
It
stupid,
was. It
but
was basically just a it was great though. I had a blast doing that. It was like the first time I'd, you know, just found
yeah,
the joy of criticizing people's work.
it's stupid, but it's fun. I don't know. I think the first one's a guilty
Oh yeah,
pleasure. Don't watch the sequels. Third one doesn't
it's
even have
definitely
great
going for
reviews.
that like Indiana Jones fun
Yeah,
thing. So you know,
it captures that really
that's
nicely.
nothing to shake at.
From the director of Van
Uh,
And
Helsing.
and and plus, I think Adam Savage actually was part of the team from ILM who helped do the production on that,
That's true.
oh
like the
wow.
That
special
is
effects.
correct.
Yeah, that's one of his stories. He has like there was like some video on Tested where I think he has like a tile from like the relief sculptures that they made for the miniatures, like just this like tile of kind of ornate patterns that would be replicated, um, and it's just part of the structure for those films. If I can find that video, I'll bring it up. But it shows him kind of talking about it, just a little piece from his work on that film.
Wow.
Nice. Oh,
Um,
um,
what I
yes,
would
sir.
give Prince of Egypt. I'm full bias on display. This is. Have I given a 10 on this show yet? I'm giving this a 9.5. Like this movie is
You gave
capital
Galaxy
A
Quest
art.
10, I think.
Like this movie is just art from start to finish. Even if you don't happen to be of any particular religious persuasion, I think that basically anybody can look at this movie as a brilliant story, a gorgeously animated film, and one that has stood the test of time and will continue to stand for decades to come.
Nice. Would you
Absolutely.
say it's like poetry? And would you say it rhymes? Anyways, Drew, lovely having you back on, man. Thanks for coming. You're still one of the best guests ever. Everybody's the best guest ever, but you're one of the best guests ever. It's great having you back on here.
It's always a pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you.
You are certainly one of the guests of all time that we love having.
Yeah, you're one of the guests of all time. You already made $1 billion, and you have a 266 on Rotten Tomatoes. So good job, fantastic. Anyways, this Saturday we're doing a Call of Cthulhu one shot, otherwise titled as Deep Within. Join us where Drew Adams and Devin Kane, both of these fucks, are gonna be guest starring as players as really bizarre characters that I won't spoil here. Joining a hardy crew of 1920s workers in the journey to the lost city of Atlantis. What could possibly go wrong? We'll find out. Tune in
What?
Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the same Twitch channel to find out. Also, next Thursday, it's 420, so we're gonna do some stoner movies. I don't remember what those stoner movies are. I think
How apropos.
I think one of them was Pineapple Express. I'm sorry, I'll have to ask Steven about this one. I had a long day at work. I'm tired. Thank you guys.
I thought